Good morning, and thank you for attending. I am joined by Janet Chicky-Choppy and Gordon Denlinger, my deputies for audit. Today, I'm releasing our performance audit of the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development business waiver process as a result of the governor's COVID-19 shutdown last year. The time period of this audit covered March 6th through June 5th of 2020. And let me state up front, I am not here to make this audit a political issue. This pandemic has affected almost all of us, personally and professionally. And we are still dealing with a serious public health issue. This was an unprecedented global event that exposed vulnerabilities in many aspects of our society and our government. And we have an opportunity to learn from it. This audit report recommends ways that Pennsylvania can do a better job should we be faced with such a serious challenge again. Our audit revealed a flawed process that provided inconsistent answers to business owners and caused confusion. While the pandemic certainly presented some unique challenges, the waiver process was hastily assembled on the fly and unevenly administered. This process should be reformed before anything like this is ever used again. The specifics of what the audit revealed are DCED received a total of 42,380 waiver requests and granted more than 7,000 of them. DCED said roughly 1/3 of those requests came from businesses that did not need to apply for a waiver. Now, that alone is strong evidence that business owners were confused by the state's guidance on life-sustaining businesses. The guidance, first issued on March 19th, changed more than 9 times before May 28th. A frequent asked questions document, something that was supposed to make things clearer for business owners, changed a total of 14 times. The waiver application itself was revised 5 times. While these changes were somewhat understandable in light of the evolving circumstances, they can certainly contribute to the confusion felt by the business owners. Our team selected 150 waiver applications for closer review and examination. Auditors felt the final responses issued to 103 of the applications appeared reasonable. They questioned the responses to the other 45 applications. They were concerned with the extent of subjectivity involved in making these decisions. But these questionable decisions had real-life negative consequences to businesses that should have been able to operate, but instead were told they had to close. For example, a greenhouse business, selling fruits and vegetables, had asked to fill phone orders through either pickup or delivery. They initially received a response that a waiver was not required. It was later changed to no. DCED should have clarified in its initial response that only delivery of items was allowed. This likely caused frustration and confusion to businesses as to what they were allowed to do. We also looked at response times for the 150 applications. 2 of them got no responses. For the others, initial decisions were were issued within a range of 1 to 28 days, with an average of just under 6 days. When the future of your business may be hanging by a thread, waiting even just a few days for an answer can feel like an eternity. These days were stressful, not only for business owners, but for their employees and their families as well. The review process used by DCED evolved as time went on. Early applications were handled differently than those that came later, when an extra layer of review was added, sometimes including attorneys. Business that used certain keywords in their applications got favorable but questionable responses. For example, reviewers were looking for certain phrases, such as a statement that a business was serving healthcare providers or that it would not serve customers in person. The tracking databases used by DCED did not include each decision made, but only the final determination. Some businesses reached out to trade groups, legislators for help because there was no formal appeal process. While outside involvement does not appear to have had an influence on the type of response issued, it may have led to some waiver requests getting a faster response. And getting prompt answers should not depend on whether or not you have the right connections in Harrisburg. In all, our audit has 5 findings and 22 recommendations. Should a waiver program or anything like this be ever needed again? To summarize, our recommendations include giving more stakeholders, including the business community, a voice in developing industry guidelines, building greater accountability and transparency into the decision-making process, and limiting the number of changes while the program is in operation. The state must provide a playing field that is as level as possible, recognizing that businesses are crucial to Pennsylvania's economic health. DCED's responses are included in this audit report, and I would like to thank DCED and the Governor's administration for cooperating with the audit team. I now open the floor up for questions.
General, first we'll call on Angela Columbus of Spotlight, PA.
Morning.
Hi, good morning, General. I was wondering if you were, or your office was able to determine how many of the businesses that were wrongly not provided waivers actually survived the closure process that they were forced to undergo, or were forced to close forever?
You know, that's a really good question. That was not part of our audit scope. However, that is definitely a good question for DCED, I mean for the governor's office. But that's a very good question. But that was not included in the scope of this particular audit. This particular audit, we only dealt with the process in which the waiver program was set up, how it was administered, and how did they define a life-sustaining business. Thank you.
Next, we have John Finnerty with CNHI. John?
John, how are you?
We're here, sir.
Oh, hey, John.
Hide behind the mask. Clearly, the audit began under your predecessor. I wonder if you could speak through, did you start over, or did you change the process at all, or how did that relationship go?
We changed nothing. We changed nothing. The scope that was in place when this audit began was the same scope in which we concluded the audit. So there's absolutely nothing changed from the DePasquale administration to my administration.
So clearly, there was no, you found no evidence that your predecessor had in any way missed anything or wasn't looking at it from.
Again, no, we did not. We followed the same scope and methodology that had already been created. We changed nothing with regards to how this audit was performed, conducted, or the audit scope. Nothing changed.
Next, we'll call Mike Gorsinger at CBS 21.
Mike, how are you?
General, good to see you. Wondering if there's, obviously from these takeaways, the audit doesn't appear that there is any sort of, I guess, nefarious, ne'er-do-wellers in this group. However, did you guys find that, that throughout the audit that, you said that outside involvement appears to have influence. Can you tell how great of an influence it had? Because like you said, I mean, these are businesses that their livelihood was hanging in the balance.
Well, the one thing that we found is that for business entities that would use, let's say, a lobbyist, or if they would contact a state legislator, they got quicker answers to their questions. However, when it came to the final decision, that didn't impact the final decision. It only impacted them getting quicker responses than other businesses.
You also had mentioned that in the findings on finding one, that the federal guidelines were different, obviously, than Pennsylvania's. Is there, you keep on saying if this program needs to be used again, I mean, are there recommendations that can be made either by your office or others where you would think that maybe the state should have used the federal government guidelines rather than develop their own?
Yeah, well, the federal guidelines are pretty much a recommendation, and the states were definitely more restrictive than the federal guidelines. And in addition to that, as I stated inside the report, they seem to have changed from 1 week to 1 month to another. And while the federal guidelines remain somewhat consistent, and I think that's probably one of the bigger issues is to make sure that if this does ever happen again, is to have an order or to have some type of process which is going to be what you use and not necessarily change and have the layer of review that this one did.
Dennis, you'll be after Stephen Caruso at Penn Capstar.
Hi, General.
Hey, Stephen, how are you?
Good. So according to this, the audit was not able to figure out who was actually, you don't have individual names of who was reviewing audits. Do you know, were they all DCED staff? Who was, it says here, I guess, that there was no identity, but do you have any sense of who in the administration was the person going yes, no, this business can open, this business should stay closed?
Actually, we don't. That information was never documented. And we asked for that information, we never received that information. So as far as the individuals who were involved with that particular process, we have no idea who those individuals are. We only have the information with regards to what the process was and the final determination. But as far as who did what, we were never given that information.
All right, Dennis, go ahead.
If I could piggyback on that question, how cooperative would you characterize DCED in this audit, number one? Number two, to any of these companies who may have been denied, is there any recourse for them based on what you're presenting here?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. As far as recourse, that I don't know. The purpose of this audit was to determine what happened. And as far as any type of recourse, then that is something that would have to be something happen outside the Auditor General's office, because unfortunately that is not part of our responsibility. And what was the second part of your question?
How cooperative was DCED in your doing of the audit?
Initially, I mean, when I came on board as Auditor General, they were cooperative. And of course, there always are those instances where you have a challenge with regards to getting some information. And as I stated in the question before, is that we don't have any information on who the decision makers were and actually what process that they had used, if there was a formal process or not.
There has been some reporting about Governor Wolf's former cabinet company that initially had gotten a waiver, then didn't get a waiver, and did you look at all specifically on that one? Is there anything you can say about that?
That was not part of this audit.
Thank you, Dennis. Finally, we have Tom Lehman at WGAO.
Can you
Hey,
speak, hi, can you speak to the outside influence issue? And I guess going forward, I know that you have your recommendations in this report, but I would have to wonder, I mean, you know how things work in Harrisburg. There's
Right.
always a lot of lobbying, a lot of influence. Can you speak to, I guess, just how you correct that from a larger perspective with, potential pandemic or situation that requires a response like this? Because there's always going to be ways for people to,
Well, the ways, in my opinion, the best way to stop that is to have a strong enough process in place and to also have the correct number of and the correct type of questions and answers for the businesses. And that was something, again, with regards to this audit, something that was not there. So you have to do a lot of your due diligence up front to assure that any potential questions that a business owner is going to have, there is a place for those individuals to go. And if they do happen to reach out to anybody in the state, then the state would provide them with a clear and concise answer that's consistent to other questions that they may get.
So at the end of the day, it needs to be more yes or, it needs to be more clear about yes or no.
It definitely needs to be more clear about yes and no, and how to do something.
Any follow-up questions, quick, briefly?
The application process, just to be clear, the application itself didn't have the business name on it, correct? So the the people that were looking at the application for a waiver, they wouldn't know the name of the business, is that correct?
That I am not sure.
We had the names.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, we did have the names. So thank you.
It
Thank you, Jim.
So was there, would you say then that not knowing who was making the final decisions, that could have influenced the outcome depending on who they know and?
There was no evidence of that. There was no evidence that somebody who was reviewing the application saw a business name and they say, oh, I like this business, or I don't like this business, and the decision was made off of that. So we have no evidence of that. The only evidence that we have is where the outside influences was used to get quicker answers for those individuals, not necessarily deciding whether or not somebody is granted a waiver or not.
Is there a search, I'm sorry, just one more follow. Are you guys continuing the process of, because you said that the information on who made the decisions and any type of process that they might have used weren't given to you, are you guys continuing that
Well,
conversation?
as of today, this completes the audit report.
John Finnerty had a follow-up.
Hey, John.
Yeah, just go through, you mentioned sort of the businesses that used the proper buzzwords
Right.
got approved. Would you say then that was there a pattern of really sort of inconsistencies where, like, say a greenhouse was approved, but was there a pattern where like a greenhouse was approved and 7 others weren't because they didn't fill it out right?
No, I really couldn't base it on an industry type. We would just base it on the use of those particular buzzwords. So we can't say whether it was a greenhouse, a restaurant, or takeout area. It's just when those buzzwords were used, we had noticed that some of those applications had gone through.
Just as a matter of understanding the process, then when they were making decisions, they weren't putting out some sort of statement that said, okay, we've approved a restaurant to do this, so every other restaurant that operates in a similar fashion should have the same waiver. They were doing it just on an individual basis. Is that accurate?
Pretty much, yes. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering if the audit is looking at the question of enforcement. One of the biggest criticisms at the time when the shutdown had occurred and the waiver process was happening was that there were businesses open and there was really no, that shouldn't have been open, and that there was really no way to no enforcement of that. I'm wondering if your audit looked at that, and even if it didn't, if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, we didn't look at the enforcement of the process, whether or not if a business was operating when it shouldn't. I know for a fact that there were some businesses who were in other parts of the state that weren't given waivers. They still operated, and they ended up being shut down by the state police. However, that information was not included in this audit report. This audit report, the scope of this audit report was just how the process of the business waiver was created, how it was implemented, and what was a life-sustaining business.
But based off of what you've seen from the audit's results, do you think that enforcement is an important part of administering a program like this in the future?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, General. Tom, follow?
Just, could you speak to the fact, I mean, this was a pretty unprecedented situation, and your findings, and I guess potentially looking through communications back and forth, did you get the impression that there was confusion, or perhaps, you know?
There was confusion. There was confusion, and keep in mind, you know, one of the things that I opened up with was that this was an unprecedented pandemic, and things were hastily put together, and it caused confusion, you know, with the businesses and with the individuals. So, yeah, to answer your question, there was confusion.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, General.
Thank you.